Okay, good evening. Welcome to the School of Visual Arts. My name's Alice Twemlow, and thank you very much. I'm the chair of the DCRIT program, which is an MFA in design criticism, but also we just announced that we are initiating a one-year MA in design research, writing and criticism. So as you can tell, we like really long, complicated names for our departments. I'm sure there's a usability issue with that, but which we can discuss later, but there it is. So you may have seen the email that went out yesterday announcing this evolution transformation, which we're all very excited about. So if you're interested in this one-year MA, which is starting this fall, do come along to our open house on March 22nd or have a chat with me over wine and cheese after this lecture. A couple of other things I wanted to mention. There's also our annual design, writing and research 2-week summer intensive, very exciting, action-packed, up close and personal type of experience here in New York. So again, there's a website for this. Applications are due April 1st, and the spaces fill up really, really fast. So if that's something that appeals, grab one of the postcards, check out the website, and sign up for that. And my last piece of housekeeping, last but not least, actually involves these people walking in right now. Not to call you out, but some of the second-year students, as part of the sort of graduating hoops that I make them jump through to escape from DCRIT, they put on a conference to tell everyone about their incredible thesis research, and that's taking place on May the 2nd, and it's in the SVA Theatre. It's an excellent event, now in its 5th year. And they also invite along keynote speakers to accompany them on the stage. This year we have moderator Justin McGuirk from Britain, an architecture critic. We have the author Nicholson Baker to give us our keynote, which should be fantastic. I've actually asked him 4 times now, and he finally said yes. I'm really excited about that. Sorry? Yeah, that guy. Yeah, that's what we're hoping. Probably not on exactly that topic, but Eric Chen, who is curator of Architecture and Design Museum in Hong Kong, Sylvia Lavin, an architectural critic, and Peter Lunenfeld, who specializes in design futures. So, and that's just the keynote. The real stars of the show are the graduating students of the program who will be presenting their thesis research. So another email will be going out about that later this week, so watch this space. But tonight really is all about our first year students. This is the spring lecture series that is curated, entirely sort of conceived and put together by the first year students working as a group. And I love the list they've come up with. We're covering the entire spectrum of things that design and design criticism is concerned with. We've had some great talks so far. If you've missed them, please check out the videos which are on our website. And now to do the introducing, I need to introduce the next introducer. It's we have a few layers here like that. So please welcome up to the podium our first year student who's in charge of tonight, Maharam.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Like Alice mentioned, my name is Mary Maldahi. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. What we're really here tonight for, though, is in past months, we've witnessed a lot of our favorite museums, our most admired established museums, shut their doors for massive redesigns. Cooper Hewitt, MoMA, V&A. These changes have surpassed the aesthetic and have caused us, as designers and critics, to rethink what it means to be a museum in 2014. Museums can no longer thrive as places where we simply go to see art. Instead, we want to play a role in how these things are chosen, presented, and interpreted. Here at DCRIT, we're constantly thinking about how design is changing and what it means. We're taught to craft our stories and our opinions into easily digestible terms. Much like the redesign of the museum experience, we strive to bring design understanding into the public realm as effectively as we can. At the forefront of these changes is the digital. The impact of technology on the way we learn has crept its way into the museum, and we have no choice but to keep up. I think the studio at the forefront of all of this revolution is Potion Design, a firm based here in New York City. Tonight's guest, Phillip Tiongson, is a principal and co-founder of Potion, and he seeks to find fundamental successes from the past to build on in the age of interactivity. Phillip and his team are responsible for the Future of Energy exhibit at the Museum of Industry and Science in Chicago. Oh, sorry. Phillip Tiongson. Everyone. At the Museum of Industry and Science in Chicago, they've created the Future of Energy exhibit. It's a space completely blocked out from natural light that allows you to actually see energy as it's being used and produced. Another project at the Brooklyn Navy Yard is a timetable that allows you to see 400 years of American history in just 5 minutes. But Potion also works beyond the museum landscape. They're responsible for last year's re-release of Joseph Albers' book, Interaction of Color, an iPad app for the book that actually allows you to experiment with the colors and share your designs with friends. As a graduate of both the MIT Media Lab and Columbia's Graduate Film School, Phillip combines the tools of a software designer with the careful craft of storytelling. He understands that as social creatures, we're at our best when we immerse ourselves in whatever it is we're trying to learn. I think Phillip's success and his firm's success really stems from their enthusiasm to collaborate at the intersection of design, technology, and narrative. So, I'm very excited to hear more about these collaborations. So please help me in introducing digital storyteller, programmer, and designer, Phillip Tiongson.
Thank you. Okay, good. Hello. This is a video that I shot from an airplane flying into New York. I'm here, but I just like to be. It's a nice way to get sort of situated. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to present to this crowd. This audience is I've spoken to designers, I've spoken to sort of general audience, but this is a very special crowd. This is a crowd that understands and talks about and thinks about design. And so it's made me really think about a little bit about our practice in a different way. I've sort of tried to step back and think a little bit about what we think about when we do what we do instead of just simply how we execute it. And so part of what I'm trying to do tonight is walk you through what I think digital points to, where I want it to go, and where when we work with the work that we do, and I will show you some of the work also, how this idea of inventing intention works. So the title is Inventing Intention, Building Experiential Stories. We start our story sort of, this is the lobby of the Met, if you don't recognize it. I'm sure everyone here does. But as Mariam was saying, I think that museums have an increased burden. They're thinking about visitors differently. Visitors are coming to the museum for different reasons, and they are engaging visitors in many different levels. And I think that from social media to interactive media in the museum to many different kinds of outreach. But ultimately, we're trying to bring people in so that they can have an experience with whatever that museum has. In this case, art. That transformative experience, that experience that you are trying to get people to, often it starts at the lobby. People have to get in the door, but you have to get them all the way along many steps to the art. And those experiences, don't have to be a painting. This is a still from E.T. This is a movie that I had a very touching experience with, and we'll get into that. But I think that what we're trying to do is to ease that transition, to help bring, for people who have a lot of digital access in their lives, more and more there's a lot of competition for attention. How do we bring that, how do we use those tools to engage that audience and a widening audience, and that's another one of the challenges. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit about this idea of taking, going from the visitor experience, sort of the user experience in some ways, and how do we get to a transformative experience, and what are the steps, what are the pieces that I think are critical, and how I can scaffold that, how our work sort of helps bring you along. And again, there are people who can go straight to this. There are people who will walk into the Met and have a transformative experience with art. So this does not replace that. And I think a lot of people get scared that, bringing iPads into a museum, there's this idea that somehow that's going to take away other kinds of experiences. And I think that what museums are understanding is that you have to have many levels of those experiences to engage a wider audience. So that's at least my argument. This is the talk for tonight. We have the menu, and we'll start with me. Who am I? I'm Philip, and I went into the vaults a little bit. I went back to think about sort of the genesis of some of the things that I've been thinking about. Sorry, do you need to sit down? Okay. There's a seat over there. Come on in. Hurry. The movie's about to start. So I did go back to the vaults, and you're going to see a piece of footage that has not been seen by anyone in maybe 30 years. So this is me. This is my first computer. I found that this is the first time that I opened my Apple IIc computer. This was my Christmas. This is probably 1984. I also got some cash, which I was very excited about. And I noticed something. I was wearing this shirt. And it's funny because when I saw this, I was just sort of browsing through. I realized this I had seen this movie and I had connected to it. And this movie has actually been a part of my life since then, right? And it's really affected my trajectory in a way that I didn't really expect. So I'm principal of Potion, and I founded it with my partner Jared, and I've actually taken over leadership of the studio. I'm a filmmaker and storyteller, and there's a little piece of film from my history. I'm also an engineer, and I think that this scene from my life actually encapsulates those two things, that actually film and computation were already in my head at this age, and that somehow I've been wandering around trying to find a way to bring those two things together. So it's sort of inevitable that I ended up at MIT. There was this gravitational pull and at the Media Lab. And I think the Media Lab, especially when I was there was this idea that media and computation and art and design and music, film, there's a convergence that happens. And there's something special that happens when you bring those people together, an understanding. But, and now I think that has been even more, that's more pervasive now than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I was there. I've always had a facility for technology, and so MIT was a natural place for me to go, but I was very lucky that my mentor, John Maeda, sort of took me aside. I was plowing straight ahead towards my PhD. I was ready and willing to go where no technologists had gone before. And he took me aside and he said, what you're looking for isn't here. What you need is distance. You need an understanding of story in order to make something new with the idea of storytelling. And it was something that I was exploring at the lab. You have to have a critical understanding of story. And that's something that MIT, it's not known for, and it's a struggle. I mean, it's a struggle to find a community. And I think that understanding that to make something new, you have to step away from it. You have to understand it. Was something that when you're deep into it, it's very hard to take. But John helped me see that. And this is the first page of my thesis. And again, I didn't realize E.T. was on the first page of my thesis. And this is John, he was my reader. The first anecdote in my thesis is talking about going to see E.T. and how I had that experience with that, and how moving, and how actually I cried when I saw it. And I was 8 or 10. But then I bought the game, E.T. the game. Has anyone played E.T. the game for Atari 2600? It is reviled. It is generally considered one of the worst games ever created for the platform. It is, and I remember that. And that was something that I was deeply disappointed by that. That was my first disappointment. I'd always imagined myself as the boy, not the alien. In the game, you are E.T., not Elliot. And how could they have made that mistake? So even at MIT, again, was this convergence of this storytelling aspect and computation. And that moment still resonated with me when I began that process, or when I was finishing that process. So I came to Columbia, came to New York, and I went to film school. And this is production stills from my film. And they say a film dies 3 times. The first time when you write it, it dies in your head. The second time when you shoot it, it dies on the screen. And then the third time when you edit it. My film died many more times than that. It is hard to make art. And I gained that appreciation. I understand that more. When you try to do it, it's you realize you gain humility there. You gain an understanding. And I began to understand more of what it meant to bring storytelling to computation. So that led me to found Potion. So Potion is my company now, and we really are interested at this. I created a place where I could continue to move that idea forward, to bring those two things together. And I wanted to shout out to my team. This is my hand-picked staff, all of whom are thinking about these problems and making this work. So I'm very proud to stand in front of them. So what do we do? And I think what I wanted to do was just show you a little video to start, and then to sort of break it apart a little bit. So we'll just show a little video. Do we want to filter in now? Not much of a crowd. Are we okay? Anyone want to move in the back? All right. We have more floor space. Please. Oh, and this is a little preview. I'm going to talk about intuition, intention, challenges. Why do people care? Why do you care? I don't know. And then questions. Okay, so this is a video. This shows you some of our work. I'll turn this down. So I'll talk over this a little bit. We have built a lot of, we worked in museums. This is the LA Museum of the Holocaust. We built mobile experience and environmental experience there. This is the first experience in the museum. And it's about connecting to a world before the Holocaust. I'm going to talk about this project. This is the Star Spangled Banner interactive gallery in the National Museum of American History. Anyone's downloaded Biblion, the New York Public Library's iPad apps, we designed those 2 editions. Really looking at how to give story shape, how to represent that. This is Brooklyn Navy Yards. This will be the only peek that you get to see of it tonight, but you can go to Brooklyn if anyone lives there. Really interesting to see the space evolve over time. I'm going to talk a little more about this later. This is the Tenement Museum, Lower East Side Tenement Museum. Smithsonian Channel for iPad app, basically trying to learn how to create your own channel, how to allow you to discover their content in a new way. It's been tremendously successful. Their most successful digital property, even over their website. Well, I think. This is a restaurant, so this is a little more fun. You can send messages in Russian to other people in the bar. Maharam, a wonderful New York design company. We did an iPad that visualizes their catalog and their performance analytics. Another wine bar, because those are really fun. And what we really try to do is always create interactions that are surprising or different. And I'll talk about sort of how we arrive at that. Interactive floor, hearts. This for Nike. So that's what we do. And I think a lot of what I started to think about is this idea of inventing intuition. And I know that that doesn't mean anything yet, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think that means. This is Norbert Wiener. I don't know, maybe not a big name in this crowd. He was an MIT professor, he was my smartest guy. And he essentially invented the idea of cybernetics. Cybernetics this is one of his first papers, sort of summed up with this idea that society can be understood through a study of the messages and communication between essentially the elements in that community. Messages between man and machines and man, and between machine and machine are destined to play an ever-increasing part. This is in 1947, and his machines were the size of rooms. I think that this is playing out right now. The way that we are communicating with machines are communicating with us, how we're communicating through machines is becoming an integral part of our society. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a specific, I think, an interesting anecdote about Norbert. So this is the kind of computer that he would work with. And again, he didn't do this one specifically, but he worked on things like this. And one day, a team of engineers came to him and said, "It's broken. There's something wrong. We cannot figure out what it is." And he said, "Okay, well, that's interesting. Can you sit down and tell me?" So he sat down with them, and they walked through all of the things that they did and all of the steps. And he said, "Okay, so walk down that hallway, go through this door, through that door, turn left, open this door, and behind that door you'll find a wire that has been chewed through and a dead mouse." They did it, and they did, and they found it, and he knew. He had that intuition about what it could be. Now, that intuition came from the fact that he had designed the system. Years and years of understanding, of training. Intuition can come from deep understanding of the subject matter. But when it comes sort of as an aha moment. It almost comes, you don't even expect it sometimes, and it comes to you. And to me, that spark of intuition, of knowing what you need to do, right? That is something that we really strive for. We really strive to make things intuitive. And you hear that a lot about interfaces. Oh, it's so intuitive. How can that be? How can be something, if intuition takes that much time to develop, in a subject matter, how can something be intuitive off the bat? That, to me, speaks to the design. So the design itself sort of takes the work of of making it understandable and is honed and refined, and all of the work that goes into the design can make things feel intuitive. And to me, this is an example of that. So this is a red button. It's big. I don't even know what it's for, but I want to press it. It's important. It makes me think something will happen if I press this button, or something maybe bad, maybe good, something big. And that is sort of designed into its shape and its color and its size. In the same way, even something as simple as a hammer, this tool has gone through, thousands of years of evolution, and we have also spent, all of our lives picking things up. We have developed this understanding of what it means when you do this. And to me, knowing that you pick it up by this side and that you're going to hold it, that's intuition. And that's giving you it's giving you clues, and it is designed in such a way that it makes that sort of obvious, intuitively obvious. You hear that? And I think what's interesting is that once you're holding a hammer, then you're like, well, what can I use it for? Is there a nail around here somewhere? Or, this end is the intention end. This end is what you would use this on. So in a way, the way that I think about it, intuition, if you can invent intuition, if you can place intuition into or if you can do the work to design the piece properly, it allows people to invent intuition and to then move into intention. And so when the world looks like a nail, then you're looking for something to do. So I think it's also interesting to talk about this when this doesn't work. Sort of the opposite of this. So this is a hand towel dispenser I've encountered, and it sort of has all these conflicting messages. There's like, do I push that? Do I hold my hand here? Oh, no touch. No, place your hand below here. What am I supposed to do? It's telling me what not to do. So I'm trying to get this towel, and then suddenly it comes out anyway. And that was my intention. I wanted the towel, but it was so unintuitive. It was the opposite. It was like no matter what, it was accidental almost that the towel came out, even though that was my intention. And I think that that's just the interesting contrast between the design of something that tells you how to do what you want to do versus the design of something that almost works against it and is unsatisfying, no matter, even if it does what you want. And I think that that's interesting. So that's where, that's the beginning of that. So I'm going to have a little user participation. This is what I was hoping. I have a lot of smart people in this room. So I'm going to start. So the idea that the user acts. So for us, interaction design, what happens when the user acts? So does anyone have any guesses? Anyone want to throw out some words here? Responds. Reacts. Ooh, someone nailed it. To me, the design reacts. So that's the first step. And some things stop here. The user acts and the design reacts. But I think what you build is that when the design reacts, the user expects now. So the user now stands in front of this thing and they have an expectation. And that expectation, I think, is something very special. And I want to sort of talk about that. Has anyone played Minute to Win It? Have anyone watched that show on TV? There's this show that's called Minute to Win It, and there's this challenge in which you it's called Candy Elevator. And you put this pencil on your ear and you try to pull it up to your mouth and eat it without it falling down. And my daughter got obsessed with this idea of a candy elevator. She just loved that. And she practiced and practiced, and there was this connection. And there's this moment when the candy is right by your mouth, and you have this expectation. And to me, it's that moment is so interesting and so powerful, because you've created, through the design or through this reaction, through this experience, you've created this expectation that what do you do with it as a designer? So the user expects, and what does the design do? Satisfies? Anybody else? Surprises. I like surprises. Delivers. Anybody else? Because anticipates is really, really nice. The word that I landed on was delight. I think that delight is a word that gets thrown around a lot now. People, Apple says they delight. Why is it delight? It's delight to me because you've created an expectation, but not only do you satisfy it, you exceed it in some way. How do you exceed that expectation that you've just set? How do you create that expectation? And so for me, that is that's the bar. The bar is not simply to satisfy, but is to create an emotional connection. I think that's where that word delight and surprises, I think, gets to it also. It's surprising but still satisfying. And the real trick is, how do you repeat that? How do you keep that going through interactions over and over again? So what are we up against? And I think that this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges of digital media. I think digital media have some special challenges. If you think about the form of the book, it's been very stable for thousands of years, hundreds of years at least. And digital media has sort of some special challenges. Innovation is sort of this double-edged sword of, yes, you can do more, but the pace of innovation. This is my idea of the first digital display. The single light bulb. It's electronic. You could flip it on and off. 1 pixel, and it required potentially a whole room to generate the electricity for it. And now, within the span of 50 years, a little more than that actually. Google Glass has thousands of pixels, sort of riding on your eyeball or right next to it. I think that just to help put it in perspective, again, and this is really just an illustration of the speed at which this happened. So this is the size of a transistor, or sort of a standard transistor, about 2 centimeters, about this big. And the silicon in which your computers now have transistors, this is on the order of 20 nanometers. So we're talking about you could fit 1 million of these inside your old transistor. And that you could fit about 1 million of those in there. In that wafer, we have 10 to the 7, so this is 10 million transistors in that wafer. So if we were just to, as a thought experiment, to think about the old transistor at the size, it is, if we had that same wafer, it would be the size of our solar system. That we are essentially building things that are gigantuan scale so quickly, and that was within the span of 40 years. That the technology itself is moving so fast that not only does the capabilities change, but the expectations change. The expectations change of what you can do with that. So for me, again, I think it's interesting to go back. This is 1965. This is Ivan Sutherland. He wrote a brilliant paper called The Ultimate Display, where he describes essentially today's virtual reality, Oculus Rift kind of stuff. A place where you can see and feel all the things that you could imagine. And this was his prototype. And the expectation here was that this was tethered to, again, a room full of computers that would barely keep up with his ability to sort of move around. 15 years later, here's my Apple IIc again. Wow, it works great. We're so happy that it has color. I mean, oh my God. And the mouse is so new. I have my floppy disks. That was in the span of 15 to 20 years. This was just 10 years ago. This is my partner Jared when we started the firm. This was on our first job. This was our first interactive table that we built, and we had to ship it in a crate like that. We essentially invented all of the technology inside it because there was nothing off the shelf that did that. There was nothing off the shelf that allowed you to do touch surfaces in this form factor in a portable way. This was portable, right? The fact that we could ship this from New York, was amazing. And we had to bring it with us because no one would believe that we had it, right? That was 10 years ago. 4 years ago, the iPad lands. And the iPad has essentially almost all the functionality of that gigantic table, and everyone has it in their hands now. And now, like 2 years later, the iPad's too big. I need the mini, and not even that. No, I need the mini with Retina, right? Like it's not enough. The expectations of the technology have moved so quickly, even with the introduction of that. And again, I think it's just about scale when you compare it to the book. I think that, of course, the book has had innovation, but at this scale is sort of phenomenal. Maybe singular in human history. This is a funny ad. Now you carry a device in your pocket which replaces all of these things. This is like a 1991 Radio Shack ad, and it's sad for Radio Shack, but I don't need to carry around my Tandy computer system and my mobile cellular phone. I think that's but this was the expectation then, and now the expectation is that you have a supercomputer in your pocket that's connected to the internet all the time, and I can't get good reception here. I'm so annoyed that I can't check into, whatever, Foursquare. So, and that's again just the pace of expectations that go with that rapidly escalating technology. And so, of course, who has expectations but the audience. So how the audience is affected. And I think there was and I'm going to go back to this, there's a very special person who would have all of these technologies. Not everyone had the mobile CV. Not everyone had the easiest to use phone answerer. That people were afraid because don't touch that. I just got to set up. And only a certain number of people would do that. Now, this technology, this is when Mira was born, the iPad was born virtually the same time. And now they, are toddlers, 3 and 4, they are so facile with the technology. They are an audience for it. They consume it as much as we allow them to. And I think that there's all sorts of questions about what that means, but they have become the part of the audience. So it's no longer, adults. It's now going to that extreme. And this is my mom. And this is her iPhone class. So she's taking an iPhone class, and I think this is her instructor. And she emailed me from her iPhone class. Look, I'm taking my iPhone class. Oh, and I upgraded to iOS 7. Right? Really, Mom? Really? But she is the other end of this audience with the expectations, with the performance that you get. Suddenly, the intuition that you can build into these devices begins to spread the audience out. It begins to want to access everyone. And again, and so the expectations when people walk into a museum, when people walk into a digital interactive experience, the expectations are so high. It has to work for everyone now, and it's got to be super fast and never break. And those are the expectations that are being set. So, those are the challenges that I think we face, and I think that we face again. And this is not just for technology, but for attention. These are challenges that affect everything. So, in my mind, the design process sort of puts a box around these things, because to me, when you are that certain design, certain use of thinking about what people want, thinking how they thinking about what they need, that helps bridge the gap. You don't have to be using the latest technology necessarily if you're still satisfying the needs that are being asked of you. So if you can control that, this is a way to sort of have some boundary around that crazy curve. So let's see, how are we doing? I'll try to move a little more quickly. Museum of Natural American History. There is a flag. There's a real Star-Spangled Banner. It's a gigantic, and it's behind glass because it's so fragile no one can touch it. It used to be so close that you could almost feel the fabric. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to bring back that tactile quality, that tactile nature, and to give you a sense of the scale of that thing. So here is this interactive swatch, and this is technology that is 6 years old now, but you'll see this is a real flag. This is not a projection, and this is the projection. You can get a sense of how big things are, without having to zoom or pinch. You can get a sense of, you'll see in the video, let me turn it down again. In the video, you can actually see the threads. And that's what we were trying to get to, is that this was an interaction where you could get back to the materiality of the flag, even though you don't have access to it anymore. And you get to have these additional information, but really the goal was to put people in close proximity into tactile distance with this, so that people can have a connection to that. And I think that's, it continues to serve that, even though the technology has gone way past what was doing here. Like, even just in that configuration, it serves what we wanted it to do. At the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, and I wanted to thank Vialogs, or a group that was doing a video for us. Lower East Side Tenement Museum is a very interactive place. And if you haven't gone and taken a tour there, you don't have to take our tour. Our tour is one of many tours, but they already have an amazing way of engaging with their audience through personally mediated tours. And so how do we support that with digital? This was the idea of using objects to help them tell their story. There are more stories in this space than they can fit, and they wanted a way for people to be able to engage with those stories and discover them as if they were researching sort of on their own. So this is an interactive surface, and in the space there are objects. So when you're introduced to the space, you're allowed to go in and sort of go shopping. This is the name of this tour is called Shop Life, and it talks about the sort of relationship between life and commerce on the Lower East Side. So people can pick up these objects and bring them to the table, and then the table delivers that story to them. And it really delivers it only to them. And what happens is you have a number of people on this tour who are now getting sort of individualized experiences. But what I like about that the most is that then that gives the tour guide the ability to then personalize their experience with that group. So you'll see in a second. So here everyone's sort of getting different pieces of the history. And then we've given tools to the tour guide to allow them to bring up pieces, and now they can say, so who heard about the Maedas, or who picked up the underwear package, and begin to engage them in a conversation, and that person begins telling a story to the other people in the space because only they know it. And so this group has this very unique experience. So you should definitely try it. So for us, we created this combination, this thing where there's some direct user experience and also the idea of supporting supporting the storyteller. So the last piece is interaction of color. The interaction of color is a seminal, some would call it a holy text, a text that talks about and the practice of understanding color. And it was really built, Albers had this very hands-on technique. The book is written as a guide. It's written as a way to experience color yourself. And one of the things that was really important is that we went back to sort of, this is the original interaction of color. It's a set of books that actually are meant to be pulled out and viewed together. They're meant to be simultaneously accessed. And this was the most interactive way that Albers could do it in his time. This was his technology, and we took that to heart. And one of the things that was very important to him was the physicality of cut paper for experimenting with color. He told, it's in the first chapter of the book, what I want you to do is to use cut paper and these essentially this reference color, because that way you concentrate on the color, not on mixing color, not on pigment, not on the variations of those things. I want you to look at color in combination with each other. And so one of the things that we did was in the design, we went back and we tried to bring that physicality back to this digital text. So there are swatches that you can pull out and that you can drop into, and then they sort of cut themselves into the patterns that he selected. Here's a little video again. I'll probably cut it a little short. So what we wanted to do was to create the same feeling that if these studies were given to you and you could play with them, you could pull them apart, we wanted to give you the same facility to do that. And I think the question is sort of, why? what are we hoping to achieve with that? To me, the text is we were working on how to bring all of the lessons and all of the understanding from the book to this through this digital medium to a new set of readers, right? And then how can we sort of get out of the way? How do we still allow you to have that experience and get out of the way? So that brings me to my final question. Why do people care? Why do people care about how they access this material? And I'm going to go back to my diagram, that between the visitor experience and the transformative experience, there are many possible steps, and there are many trajectories. But this is when we design, when we try to put these things together. I think we're always trying to propel people this direction, and that we know intuition and intention are sort of the first steps in that direction. If you create an unintuitive experience in your in whatever you're doing, people are immediately turned off. You've lost them already. If they can't then act on what they want to do, then again you've lost them. So these are sort of the beginning steps, the important elements. And what I think happens is when people once you have an intuitive experience, once you can begin to act on these actions, the idea that people become more engaged. So they talk about engagement. So to me, the next piece is that once they begin to act and start working, then they're engaging with the material. To me, the next piece is once you begin to engage with something, once you begin to work with something, then it starts to become immersive. And what I love about this is that it can be, whether it's an iPad or whether it's a Oculus Rift experience or a movie, once you really get immersed in something, you begin to, the thing itself, whatever you're using to get to the experience, begins to sort of disappear, right? And so that immersion is sort of the next step. And so, we're going to come back now. So we've been hanging out. The candy is here, and it's almost there. And you're totally immersed in the act of doing this activity, of interacting with this piece. And when you get it, there is delight. There is this emotional experience when there is that satisfaction, when there is that connection, and sometimes when you can exceed expectation. And that I think what is interesting is that on the designer's part, sort of the more effort and time that you put into something, the more effortless it can appear to the people who are coming to it. And that's, I think, what we strive for, is that when the experience itself, it begins with intuition, it begins with intention, but as you get into that experience, it begins to disappear. And it begins to become the way that you just learn about the Smithsonian Channel, or you just are watching content, or you are no longer thinking about how it works, but it becomes the thing that you are trying to achieve. And so the hammer, coming back to the hammer, when you start using the hammer, you're not thinking about the hammer anymore as a tool. You're thinking about the nail. You're just thinking about what you're trying to build. When you come to art, the art is ultimately the experience, and what brings you there, this what you have when you do get to that experience, how you can connect hopefully to that experience. We're just trying to get you to the threshold, right? But only you can take the next step. So for me, that last piece, what sort of the threshold on which you sit is ownership. And when I think about ownership, it's not about like, oh, I own that piece of art. It's about owning that emotional experience, owning the connection that once you've internalized it, and you're like, oh, that's, I love that piece of art. That's, and you're showing it to other people because you want to share it. That's when you're right there. So my own connection is, I realized that connecting back to E.T. and that there is still, that this piece of art had a transformative experience in my life, that I realized that this is the success of that moment that I was totally immersed and that I totally had, I still own, and it has changed the trajectory of my life. And that's why I'm here speaking to you today. So, thank you very much. Oops. Oh, there we go.
Thanks, Philip. We're going to do a little
Great.
reshuffle.
All right, sure. Sorry.
Grab one of those chairs from you guys, and maybe if you were able to sit on someone's lap. And Karen, why don't you go there and we'll take a seat here.
We're looking for interns. Do we need this still? Do we want
Yeah, you should hold on to that. That was just really great, fascinating stories, mainly about candy, hammers, and E.T., but also other amazing things along the way. So thank you so much. Now, the way this is going to work, I'm going to sit here a bit like a lemon, and Maharam is going to ask some very astute questions.
Okay.
And then we're going to take some questions from first-year students and maybe members of the audience, and then we'll all go and drink some wine. Okay? Is that
Perfect.
all right?
No, I like that I like the trajectory we're on.
Well, we need to talk about plot development, right?
Yeah.
Narrative. So, fire away.
Okay. Well, you can keep that. It's very loud. My main question right now is, at a recent talk, the Queens Museum director, Tom Finkelpearl, said that one of the main difficulties today is quantifying the success of these show methods.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you go into a project and assess the success of your work?
Well, I think that it's sort of, again, this sort of double-edged sword, quantification, because it's digital, there are now many more ways that you can instrument the experience. So how many clicks were there, or how many people, walked through this doorway or walked out this direction, or you sort of get the equivalent to website analytics for your exhibit, and things like iBeacon and place location gives you some of that. But it also doesn't tell you whether someone had a really great experience, or they dropped their phone and they couldn't find it and they were there for 20 minutes. So there's a certain level of it's hard to read. There can be noise there, and I think that when we look at the evaluation of our work, we always go back to the institution and see if they feel like their goals are being met, if they are getting the kind of user feedback and visitor feedback on the experience that points to success. And they're usually when we work with institutions, they know their audience. They know the people who come to their space, and so they know whether they're happy or sad. And that's been a big part of what we've been doing, or how we quantify it.
Do you ever hang out yourself and observe?
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, that's I don't even deliver something until I've seen it actually work. And there's this whole process. We really try to iterate on this before we consider it delivered. So we might put all the hardware and the software there, but we'll be there and we'll observe it for 30 days, 90 days until we are at least satisfied.
And I'm sure your daughter tested it too.
No, absolutely. She's all over them now.
Do you have any instances where you've seen your work have greater implications outside the museum? Different social issues, education, anything like that?
I think that it's interesting. I mean, when we look at the Museum of Science and Industry, this is a very diverse group of kids coming, because they're sort of the Museum of Science and Industry is this destination for school groups. So every school sort of has this rotation of we're going to go to the museum today. And so what we're seeing is people being introduced to, like, we had to be very sensitive to how, what kind of house we represented in Future House, because some people live in a single family house, but a lot of people don't. They don't connect to what the problems might be in there. So what we're seeing is people. What is great is the subversive idea behind that experiment was to get people out of thinking about saving energy by turning off a light switch, but by thinking, can I become a designer of the transit system? Like, what if I could redesign my neighborhood? What if I could think bigger, And so, to me, really seeing that play out, and that, even though we were operating, you have to still make something that is a game and works for an individual, but starting to see, like, I had the opportunity to watch some people go through it, and what they're talking about when they're leaving is totally different than what they're talking about when they're going in.
Okay. Now, at another recent talk, there was it was said that there are a lot of innovative exhibitions, but not very many innovative actual institutions. There's a disconnect between the institutions and the exhibitions going on in the museum as well. So have you noticed any drawbacks when you do your work?
Yes. Oh, this is a very, very difficult and political kind of subject, because you think of the Met. Oh, it's the Met, right? The Met is 1,000 Mets. There are many different curators. There are many different departments. That in the Smithsonian, the Smithsonian, the idea of the Smithsonian Institution as a single place is such is not. It's sort of a disservice to the place, because there are so many different groups, and they have competing ideals and competing desires, and so they can't. They'll from leadership provides, I want to say the direction, the cardinal direction in which everyone's headed. each of the individual departments have to figure out how they want to implement that. And so I think it is very, very hard for an institution to be collectively all on the same page of which innovation and how they want to innovate, like, equally, and so I think it does take leadership from individuals who have vision within that. But I think the positive of that is that when you do, our best work has always been when there is someone on the other side, a single, not that, the whole National Museum of Natural History wants to, make a better education center, but there is a single person on the other side who is spearheading that and navigating the political situation so that this can become a model for everyone else. Because in all of these institutions, once there is success, then that shows the way and clears the path for there to be more experiments in that direction.
Following on from that, Philip, I'm wondering that, if you get this sense sometimes that there's a bit of a scramble on at the moment in museums. And
absolutely.
In fact, when they're coming to you asking for digital, which I now understand is a noun, that perhaps that's not what they need and they're just panicking. Do you ever have that situation, and have you ever talked them out of hiring you?
Yeah, yes, and I think, or I think that it's often people think, oh, we have to have an app, or we have to have, someone told me we need this X, we need a screen here. And so there's a lot of cart before the horse kinds of conversations where, like, let's have a discussion about what the needs are. Let's have a discussion, like, who are you serving here? Or what is the, again, I think that and what I tried to touch on in the talk is that if you log on to any specific technology, and we've got to have X, that is, in my mind, basically placing, sort of a stick in the ground, and you're on a freight train, because any specific technology will get obsoleted within a year, right? Oh, we have to have iPads with this, iPad minis now, iPad mini with Retina, like, what was the right thing? Unless the content and the architecture was created to serve the need, then the individual technology is not as important. So I think that's where we try to, when there is that sometimes tunnel vision on a specific thing, we try to say, okay, is it possible for us to have a conversation about that?
Absolutely. And talking some more about the notion of obsolescence, I think this is very interesting in relation to what you do. You brought up a little bit, hinted at this idea of conservation and the role technology can play in conservation with the flag.
Right.
And I bet if there are other instances of that, it'd be interesting to hear. But then I also wonder about the conservation of your own technology and, maintenance. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of going into one of these places and confronting a broken interactive experience.
Absolutely. Yes, I never. No, it's absolutely an issue, especially for the smaller institutions. We work with a wide range, from the Smithsonian and MSI, they have an entire staff that are running, TRS-80 computers and Commodore 64s, preserving essentially those interactives until that wing is replaced with something else. So the larger institutions have a better understanding of okay, we need to buy 5 spares of that, and we're going to put it in our closet because when that thing goes away, we'll still have them. But the smaller institutions, one of our first clients was the museum at Eldridge Street, which is a beautiful synagogue on the Lower East Side. And they came to us, and it has been 6-7 years since we delivered that. And they're like, okay, we want to move to, the next thing. And so can we just copy the disk over to the to the new? It doesn't work that way. And that conversation and understanding, we do the best that we can to explain this technology will have a lifetime. It has, like any technology, and 5 to 7 years, that's great if you can get 7 years out of this. But you have to have sort of a plan, a migration, and understanding that the experience you're creating shouldn't have to depend on any specific, implementation, but that requires money, and so it's a conversation that is. People want to invest in digital because there's this feeling like, oh, I can always update it. I can always, change the content or add more, or, we have a new exhibition, so I'm going to add it to my digital. But there is also that ongoing, that motion from innovation that you have to also keep up with.
Okay, let's see if someone has some questions.
Anybody? Yes?
Actually, I wanted to follow up on that. Like, do you actually ensure that your work is somehow future-proof? Like, do you?
Yeah.
Yes. Second kind of question: that's so immersed in the technology. I mean, could you tell some of the pitfalls of it?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is no. The honest answer is that there's no real way to future-proof the technology. You can incorporate the best thinking into the design, and so that's where what I sort of try to point at is that if you are thinking about how to satisfy the audience and you understand their needs, then you can figure out ways for that to move from technology to technology. So that's the timeless part. But any specific piece of technology right now, at least, there's no ground to stand on. I think that, what was the second part?
Some of the pitfalls of,
I think, the pitfalls are depending on any specific thing. Like, in the very beginning, we created, when I showed you that table that was all torn apart, it actually depended on little pens, little light pens that you would pick up and you would click, and instead of touch, we were using infrared light. We built those pens ourselves. The last thing I wanted to do was be a company that made little light pens, right? Like that, I didn't realize that like if I build that into my design, I'm going to have to supply light pens for like the rest of time, right? So, understanding that, we had to be thinking ahead. We had to be thinking beyond, the solution for today, so that we don't get stuck in those sort of corners where there's no way out.
Hi, my name's Maeda.
Hi.
I'm a first year as well. I'm wondering, in all of your examples, it seems that the technology you provide is really rooted in like the materialistic object.
Yeah.
The flag is in the room.
Right.
That people get to touch the object and bring it to the table, or you visit the museum yard.
Right.
You're in that environment. Has there ever been a situation where your technology did not reflect like the material object?
Oh yeah. I think that we are special in that we do reflect the material object. It's a very rare occasion, or when you get the opportunity to do that. I think that that's been part of the way that we practice. Is we try to build on the intuition that people have from the physical environment, from their physical experience. That being said, if you look at something like Biblion, Biblion for iPad is like I said, you use the digital medium, and of course we don't want to make it so that you have to walk down stacks to to check out a, you're not pitching through hallways and like looking through card catalogs. Like there's a reason why we want to abstract some of that experience away, right? But then with Biblion, what we tried to do was still give the story an essential shape. So the way that everything is laid out in 3D space means that every story will look different when you open. Meaning, and we were thinking really about editions. So if you look at the second edition of Biblion compared to the first, the organization, the visual organization reflects sort of a difference in the collection, like the essential nature of the collection. But it's totally not a physical arrangement. It's it's constructed to reflect sort of that essential nature.
You mentioned gaming and youth culture, and I was wondering, do you look to games for inspiration?
Games are, it's funny, games are also one of those very special communities within interactive. There's a, game culture, especially the hardcore gamers. There are certain conventions, there are certain ways that those worlds work that they all have agreed upon and have become convention that are totally alien to people outside of those conventions. There's also this whole notion of the casual gamer, sort of iPad, iPhone games that have, again, usually very intuitive sort of tutorials or ways that get you to understand how to have intention. I think that we really look at that sometimes about how they're getting people to do what they want to do in these environments. There's a lot to learn there, but at the Museum of Science and Industry, I think is a good example, because there's one game which is the most difficult of the 5, right? And we've been working with them on, well, how can we make it more accessible? But recently a group of, quote, gamers had come through the system, and when they came out, they're like, we love that one, right? We loved that was the non-obvious one. We loved having that challenge, right? And that's always the balance that you have with this, where you have a wide audience coming to something. You have to sort of satisfy both of those things.
First, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I was wondering how you work with the museums and curators in the process of collecting and managing the material, and if they have systems that let them do it on their own, and how that experience is designed for them.
I think there are, as you said, there's not one way. Even within an institution, one section might use this collections management system and another system does not, or some use it for these purposes and others use it for different purposes. So that sort of standardization of data it was really a surprise to us, because we sort of felt like, okay, we're gonna go work with museums, and they have to be organized, right? Like they have to have all of this information digitized in such a way that it's accessible. The idea of a database in that sense, like a database that's queryable, a database that is rational from a programming standpoint, is actually very alien to the curatorial process. I think that one of the things that we, like when we did interactive for the Met, for the Greek and Roman gallery, and one of the simplest things was like, when you click on an object, it shows the time frame in which it was supposed to be from, right? But curators would come through and they're like, I know this object says it's from here, but it's really from here, right? There's not, like, even though it's marked with what it should be and it's appearing where it should be, there are so many exceptions. There's so many. It's not necessarily a rational process. And so, for the same thing for wines, which if anyone has browsed a wine list, or if there's any vinophiles here, the way wine lists are ordered in France and the way you order wine lists from California, totally different, right? And when we tried to create a system that displays the wines in the order, the sommelier is like, this is totally wrong, right? And like, what's the right way? Well, in France it's like this, and it's listed by vineyard, and we're like, there's no logic to that, right? And he's like, it's perfectly logical, right? Because from their training, again, there's a logic to how that's all organized, and so you have to create the systems that allow for that. And that's something that we really learned over the course of time, is that we can't come in with a preconceived notion of what is alphabetical order right? Usually not. Is chronological order? Does anyone agree what that means? The time periods in geological time compared to the recent history, totally different. You could be millions of years off, and a paleontologist doesn't care, because it's about the period, right? So those are all things that you think are, we're going to get their data and we're going to look at it, but it's becomes a real conversation about understanding why do you want to sort it, or why do you want to show it in that way. Yeah.
So a lot of museum exhibits seem to be very spatial.
Yeah.
Were there any times where you have to explore edge cases where there's some users might be hearing impaired, or there might be some certain difficulties depending on special needs? How do you guys cater to that?
Accessibility is a really, really difficult but important topic for interaction design, because in a way digital is able to provide support to that audience in ways that they've never been able to be supported before. But doing that also adds, there's a cost involved with adding additional functionality, these alternate ways of navigation, which a very small percentage of people actually utilize, right? So there's always that trade-off between fully accessible, but what the cost is there. For the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, accessibility was paramount. It was one of their sort of founding principles, and so we've had a really interesting experience there. Really, truly universal design. So how you design a sighted interface versus a non-sighted interface. What's really interesting is a non-sighted interface can totally coexist with a sighted interface and be completely different. The buttons, you might see little buttons on the screen that are here and here, but for someone using a screen reader, touching the screen, the buttons could be this big in different places, and it doesn't matter because the way that they're perceiving the interface is totally different, and it can be designed to make it more usable for them. So that's something that we have really begun, and the iPad is amazing. I mean, and Apple and iOS specifically really has deep support for accessibility, and it's become a device that when we designed Biblion, there was a group of blind readers who embraced it and gave us feedback about how you can design for this space, and it's really the iOS, its built-in accessibility features are super robust, and they've become really the way that they want you to design for that.
I've walked in late, so I'm sorry if we covered this already, but I'm wondering how much of a niche industry this is. Is it common for museums to turn to design firms like yours for advice, or is it more common to do things like this in-house? And do you have any advice for somebody who what you're doing?
Yeah, we didn't answer this question. It's still, I think that digital and interactive is becoming a more mandatory part of the conversation. It's becoming part, it's being considered in the beginning. In the very beginning, when we first started the practice, we were always the afterthought. We were always, okay, the whole museum is designed, now let's talk to these guys. we have some space for some screens here or something. And so, it was often very frustrating to come into a conversation where things like technology, well, we already bought the computers, or things like, the space in which was allocated were predetermined. That is happening a lot less. We're being invited to have those conversations earlier. But I still think that on the priority list of of an exhibition, there's still curation and the objects, and rightfully so. And digital is still sort of, I want to say, low-hanging fruit that can be cut at any time. So it is very rare. We are encountering more museums and institutions that have digital sort of understanding in-house, but it's still something that is not quite as invested yet. But places like the Cooper Hewitt and
We just saw a little bit of their renovation
yeah.
proposals, and they seem to have integrated that
Oh,
right from the get-go.
they have. They've really embraced it. I mean, I think that it's really smart. I mean, I think again, as a design institution, they want to reflect sort of some of the innovative abilities for technology to expose that media. So, there are more and more institutions that are beginning to think about that, or as you said, sort of innovative curators or innovative departments that are like beginning to build that understanding in-house. Something that we're also seeing a lot of, or beginning to see more of, is where they want to, people or a place wants to partner with us to begin to sort of seed the program. And so we will work with a place, create like the first initiative or for a mobile piece or for a in-house interactive, and then the idea is that it gets handed over to a team that they will begin to build. Potentially, like again, these are sort of conversations that we're starting to have now. So it's definitely on the minds of a lot of our clients, but I think that it's still very in flux.
Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to go into your field?
Go into my field? I think lead with your heart.
Okay. Through both your work at MIT and Columbia, you clearly see a connection between design and storytelling. So how do you see that connection playing out in the progression of technology?
I think that hopefully the idea of the digital choose your own adventure movie is done. That was never compelling, and because there's no investment. Because when you're navigating a story and you can decide if the character lives or dies, that doesn't create immersion. That creates distance, right? Video games are a really interesting medium where there's this integration of narrative with a very interactive environment. But I'm still holding out, and my thesis was about, and continues to be about, how does an author put their own intention into stories? So if you think about a story, a linear story, it's all laid out with the author's. You give your agency over to the author, and the author takes you along a ride. Well, now in this medium, the author can actually direct multiple intentions, right? They can actually guide multiple ways, and that I think is the challenge, is that the authorship is changing, so that they can authors can take advantage of the medium in a new way. And I think that that's part of where I continue to look, is how do I, as a storyteller, through this kind of work and through the experiments that we try in our studio, find new ways to bring that kind of ownership, that kind of emotional experience into the medium and see how people react to it. So I still have hope.